There we go. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to lesson 4 of the meaning of life, really. And we're studying the Kabbalah aspect of it. And tonight is quite an interesting revelation. So we're going to start without further ado. Just want to lift this a little bit so if I can find it. Hi, good evening. There we go. So in the first 3 lessons, we learned first about the search for meaning, that actions that we do, deeds that we're involved in have to have meaning, and how we find that meaning. And we gave many examples. In lesson number 2, we talked more about purpose. And meaning is not enough because you could do things that are meaningful, but they're not necessarily purposeful. You can do things that are purposeful, but they don't necessarily feel meaningful. And we try to show that actually, if you have purpose, then you have true meaning if you know what the purpose is. And that's where we went to lesson number 3, where we explained that the world was created by God, right? For a purpose. And we were created for the sense of this mission of what we have to accomplish in this world. So we're not going to go over all the 3 lessons, but we have spent a tremendous amount of time in it. And you can go back to it. If you haven't heard it, you can actually ask for the recordings because they're all there. So where we want to go now is to take it to the next level, because the question remains. And the question is that it's true that we find meaning in life and we find purpose because we understand that God created us for a mission and the world was created before us. If you remember in last week's lesson, we talked about the fact that the human came last on the scene, not so much because to say that I'm an egotist, that everything was created for my sake, but rather everything was created for me to fix. Everything was created for me, litaken, to make it a better world. And that's part of the mission that God gave me, which according to Kabbalah, that's very, very important because it's the refining of the sparks that we do. However, it seems sometimes that things are repetitive. You look at the Jewish calendar year, the observances that we have to do every day are similar, the same. We go to services in the morning, we recite the same liturgy. Once a week we have Shabbat. Every week is the same Shabbat. Every year we have the 12 months with the count of the calendar with many of the holidays. So what is so special about this? So actually, we're going to learn this in this lesson that the calendar in Judaism is quite important. And it's called the rhythm of time. And it's a constant spiral that spirals upwards. So even though on some level it seems it's the same, but it's not the same. It's not history, but it's actually what the day means. And it is actually expressed in the Jewish calendar because the Jewish calendar is very precise with the particular months of the year and with the particular duties that we have in each month, with the particular holidays, the particular mitzvot that we have to do. And this will be an eye opener for us like we have never seen before. So some of the things that I'd like to share with you on this note is the fact of the following. Living with purpose means to tapping into the energy of the day. Each day has its own unique energy. Each day has its own unique meaning. And when we recognize the uniqueness of the day and we tap into it, then it gives us a tremendous amount of meaning. So like I want to explain to you that a lot of people look at the calendar as a container. So you have a day, Like, for instance, there's the story of Abraham. It says about Abraham, V'Avraham zakein ba bayamim v'Hashem berach Avram bakol. We quoted that verse last week, that Abraham came in his days, and God blessed him with everything. And what does Rashi say? That he made every day full. Every day was a meaningful day for him. Conventional wisdom learns it as if every day is like a tin container. You can either fill up the day with purposeful activities, or you can leave the day empty and then it's a wasted day. That's the way we usually learn about the calendar. What we're going to learn in this class is that it's absolutely not true. The day is not an empty container. The day is a day that's filled with juicy energy. And the question is whether we tap into it and whether we make that day special for us and take that energy with us. And for that reason, we also learned that the special days in Judaism are not arbitrary. It's not something which is just, oh, it happens to be, or because an event happened. As we're soon going to learn, that the American Jewish joke is that what's the meaning of a holiday? The enemy tried to kill us, God saved us, now we eat. Right? You've heard that, but that is actually a very shallow way of looking at the calendar. It's the opposite is true. And what it is that every day has meaning. Now, what I want to say is this is where we need to go with this. There are two rhythms in every day. There's the routine that we do every day, and then there is the added characteristic of the day, which brings life to the entire day. Now, it's true that according to Jewish law, the routine comes first because there's a statement in Hebrew that says, Tadir v'she'ena tadir, tadir kodem. What is tadir? Tadir is something that you do regularly, repetitively, you do it constantly. Tadir ani oseh, I always do it. So things like you do every day, for instance, praying. So you pray every day. If you have an additional prayer that you have to say because of Hanukkah, that comes after the prayer, right? The same thing is with the counting of the Omer. The counting of the Omer starts on the second night of Pesach, and it has to be done at the beginning of the night. If it has to be done at the beginning of the night, maybe we should do it before we even pray the evening service, because that's the true beginning of the night. Comes along halacha and it says, Tadir v'she'ena tadir tadir kodem. Since the evening prayers is something that we do every time, every night, so therefore that has precedence. It comes first, and then after that you do the Omer. So some people think that the second thing that we do is just an add-on. What we're going to learn tonight is that it's not an add-on. It actually elevates everything that we do, even the things that we do in the routine. And these two layers of Jewish observance, the routine and the extra, not two separate, but they actually play off each other, and they're actually one thing that is actually the same. Now, one other thing that I have to say, which we're going to learn here, is that one has to be in sync with the times. If you're in sync with the times, then your life is meaningful. If you're not in sync with the times, then everything becomes a failure. Why is that statement so important? And what is the meaning in the sync of the times? A very famous statement of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Vladi, that one must live with the times. And he wasn't talking about modernity, but he was talking about the Torah portion of the week, which characterizes the entire week. Do you know that there's two ways of identifying the date when you write a letter in Hebrew? One is to write the date in Hebrew, like today was Chamishi Kislev. It was the fifth day in Kislev. But the traditional way of writing it, today was Tuesday, is Yom Shlishi leParashat Vayetze. It's the third day of the portion of Vayetze. And as we're going to see a little bit later, that the reason that we have 7 aliyot in the Torah reading is because the maftir is an add-on, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that a little later. But really, there are 7 aliyot. The 7 aliyot is to represent the 7 days of the week. And for that reason, there's a custom that the first day of the week, which is Sunday, we read the first aliyah with Rashi or other interpretations in addition to Rashi. The second day, we read the second aliyah to ourselves. We study it. And this is how we go through the 7th day. So everything has to be in sync. So in order to illustrate it, we're going to look in our textbooks right now. I'm going to ask you to open up to page 100. Okay. Let's look at the exercise. Exercise 4.1a. Imagine you're walking with a child in Massachusetts and you come across a sign that reads Plymouth Rock, landing place of the Pilgrims, 1620. There's a little rock. Today it's fenced off. And the belief is that when the Mayflower landed, the pilgrims first stepped on this rock, and that was the first taste of American soil in 1620 when the British came, and then they conquered this country and they made it into a British colony. So what happens if your son or a child that you're walking with turns to you and asks you, why did the Mayflower land here of all places? What would you say if you know the history?
They got lost.
They got lost. It's true because you know where they were trying to land first? Huh?
No,
Virginia. They were trying to land in Virginia. And somehow there was a navigational error and a windstorm, and it pushed the boat north. And the first place that they were able to stop the boat was in Plymouth, Massachusetts.
Was Virginia already a colony already?
No, but that was the area where they wanted to go. Okay, so what the point of the matter is, if you give a look at the screen on the wall, it's called an assigned value. Plymouth Rock had no value whatsoever before. It was just a rock like any other rock. But the fact that the first pilgrims landed there and they stepped onto the rock as a stepping stone onto this soil, onto this continent, so therefore now it has value. It has historical value. It becomes very important. Now, let's say if you're in California and you're in the St. Gabriel Mountains and you come across a very tall mountain, which is called Mount Wilson. And over there's a very big observatory. That's where the famous scientist Edwin Hubble had his telescope, right? Till 1949, from 1917, and he discovered all kinds of nice planets. Huh? Yeah, but he discovered some of them that are still known till today. There was questions whether the Persians saw it first, but nevertheless. So if the child asks you, why did they build the observatory on Mount Wilson? What would be your answer? Huh?
Elevation.
First of all, it's very high. It's 5,700 feet. It's also an area where there are very few clouds because it's near the desert, unlike other mountains, let's say in Montana or in other places in the United States. And the weather is basically very stable. So it's a perfect place to have an observatory. So that is not called an assigned value. That's called an intrinsic value. In other words, there is a value because if you would take that telescope and put it somewhere else, you wouldn't get what you want to get, right? So what does it mean? It means that when we look at things that have value, we have to separate between things that we refer to as assigned value or things that we call intrinsic value, that they have a value on their own. So even if we don't assign value to it, it has a value because that's the way it was created. Okay? This is a key here. Let's talk about people. So let's give a look at the page 102, exercise 4.1b. So imagine you're reading a newspaper that Dr. David Baker has been awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. He's a very famous scientist and chemist, and he discovered new proteins that he was able to make, and it was actually something that is very useful in proteins that can actually preserve life and medicine and all kinds of stuff. He's a very bright guy, so he won a Nobel Prize. At the same time, you read an article in a newspaper in the Washington Post, which shows that there's this train from the airport. It's the metro train that goes straight from Dulles Airport to downtown Washington. That's in order to avoid traffic. And they were so promoting it that when the millionth passenger came, it was a lady from she's an American Japanese that had just come back from Japan. And she took the train. She didn't realize as she went through the turnstile to go in. The bell went off, 1 million, and they stopped her and they gave her a gift, a $500 gift card and a free metro rail card. And there was a whole big publicity about it to do it. So could you imagine if a child asked you, why did they give Baker the Nobel Prize and why didn't they give it to Ivy? Or perhaps why didn't they give Dr. Baker a free metro rail card and the other one not? So the answer is the same. The Nobel Prize came to Dr. Baker as an intrinsic value, very smart man who utilized his talents and his knowledge, and he was able to invent and develop and create and teach and bring to the world a new kind of protein. So therefore he gets it. Assigned value means it could have been anyone. It could have been her husband was with her and he was 9999999. So he didn't get it. She got it. What if they would have been just the opposite? He would have gotten it, not her. Right? So that's called assigned value. Now, one of the things that we want to talk about is that whatever you find in space, you also find in time. And I have this idea before I go on to that time and space are very much related. But before I go there, we're going to use some examples of here. So let's give a look at secular holidays in our country. We have Thanksgiving coming up, right? And Thanksgiving is on a particular date or not. It's not a date of the month. It's the last Thursday of, okay. There are some holidays that, before we go to the Jewish holiday, there are some holidays that do have times. For instance, 4th of July. What does 4th of July actually celebrate? If you know your history.
The 4th of July actually celebrates the time that Paul Revere finally reached the other.
That's not the case.
And
No. What happened? It's Independence Day, but yes, go Barry. It's not exactly that. He might have done that, but that
Declaration.
exactly. But was the signing of the Declaration of the Independence? But by the way, if you read the history books, it actually one second. It actually wasn't. They haven't achieved freedom yet. They were still battling the British, but they figured that the Continental Congress, whatever they called it, which was, yeah, that they should sign that because by them it gives them the self-confidence. So they declared independence that day, but they weren't truly independent. They could have done it a day before, a day later. There was something there as far as their schedule, why it worked out better to do it on July 4th. Columbus landed in the Bahamas on October 12th, and thus you have Columbus Day. Now, he could have landed October 11th. He could have landed October 13th.
Yeah.
Not only that, for a while, Columbus Day was also, there was this vote in the United States that all these some of these big holidays should be pushed to the Monday to make it a long weekend. And Columbus Day for a while, the Columbus Day is like that, right?
Yeah.
It's always on a Monday. The same thing is with Martin Luther King Day. Martin Luther King was born on January 15th. When Congress declared it a holiday, they said it's going to be on a Monday in January. Veterans Day.
Inauguration also.
Inauguration is January, but that's always January. Yeah, but that's not moved up. It's not on a Monday. It's on January 20th, but it's not a holiday. Some people, it's the opposite of a holiday. So it just depends who was the candidate that won. But in any case, November 11th is what? Veterans Day. Why was that day declared Veterans Day? After it didn't end. That was when there was an armistice on November 11th that they decided to sign, and then they decided to have a day that they want to recognize the veterans. There was another day called Decoration Day, which eventually switched to Memorial Day, and that's also on a Monday. Now, I want you to know that Veterans Day was also for a while pushed off to the Monday, and the veterans were very upset, so they switched it back to November 11th. Okay.
World War I didn't end until the Treaty of Versailles.
You're right. It didn't sign that. But anyways, now these holidays, do they have intrinsic value or assigned value?
Fine, then.
Which means because something happened on that day, so therefore they made it. Not only that, the very fact that they don't have it on the specific day, but in some cases they even do it as a convenience to the closest Monday, means that it's an assigned holiday. It's an assigned day. But when it comes to Jewish holidays, which this is the next one you'll see, the shofar, um, that is on specific days, and that is a little bit different. Let's talk about this a little bit. And here's where we're going to sort of burst the bubble about this joke that I mentioned before, that they tried to kill us, God saved us, and that's why we eat. That is not exactly the real reason why it is that. Unlike the secular holidays, I'm going to give you another example. Thanksgiving is an example. It's always on a Thursday. Mother's Day. Mother's Day, if we have to honor mothers, it's not on the day of the month. It's at a particular day of the week in the month of May. And then they said, well, we don't want to discriminate against men. So then they invented Father's Day. In Judaism, Mother's Day and Father's Day is every day of the year, because part of the 10 Commandments, it says, honor your father and mother, not once a year. That's such an American invention. We can put them in an old age home, not care about them, and once a year we bring them a tie, or we bring them some pocketbook, and we say, we care about you. But whatever it is, whatever the holiday is, it's an assigned value. It's not considered to be inherently unique to the particular day. But Judaism sees it totally different. In Judaism, it's so different. I'm going to give you a little example. Crown Heights, Brooklyn. You all know Crown Heights, Brooklyn. So there's a holiday called Labor Day, which is another example. It's not based on the day of the month. It's just the first Monday of September. Going back to the late 70s, the West Indies, which are from the Caribbean islands, living in New York, decided that Labor Day is a good time to have a West Indies festival. And they have, it's called a West Indies parade. At least 1.5 to 2 million people come. Which street did they decide to have the parade? On Eastern Parkway, which is the main thoroughfare of Crown Heights. So this has been going on for years. All the streets are closed. It's impossible to go get in and out of the neighborhood. The police shut down the whole place, and people drink, and they're festive, and they have all kinds of colorful costumes. And it's a long day thing. It goes from 9 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Believe me, I got stuck in it one time. I had to drive back to North Carolina, and somebody asked me to pick something up in a particular street. I went there, and then I couldn't leave. They said, you're stuck. I said, I have to be in North Carolina tonight. So finally, a sergeant came over, and he said, okay, we'll open up the barricade. Now, in 1994, Labor Day fell out on the eve of Rosh Hashanah. Now, Crown Heights is a very Jewish religious community, and the eve of Rosh Hashanah, everybody is busy preparing for the holiday. People come from all over the world, and people go to the Ohel, people go here, people go there, and they just didn't know what to do. It's impossible to imagine that the entire neighborhood is shut down on the eve of the holiest day. So they went to the New York City Police Department, the Crown Heights Jewish community, and they said, we have nothing to do with it. You have to go to the organizers of the parade. So they met with the organizers of the parade, and they were talking to them, and they were very sympathetic. And the leaders of the Jewish community said, perhaps you can do it a week before or a week later. We'll work with you. We'll help you. So they look at them and said, well, perhaps you can make Rosh Hashanah a week before, a week later, right? So it's sort of like didn't rhyme. So at the end, they had it, and they figured out a way how to work it out. Years later, Labor Day fell out on Rosh Hashanah itself, and it was in 2020, I think. And then they really didn't know what they were going to do. And then COVID came, and the parade was canceled, so whatever. But nevertheless, this is what I'm trying to say, that in the mind of an American, or any kind of civilization. It's a holiday just to mark something. If you want to do it as another day, let's do it another day. I had the occasion once to visit a secular Jewish camp in Western North Carolina, and it was the week before Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, and we wanted to talk to the kids about the meaning of it. The director of the camp said, we already celebrated Tisha B'Av 2 weeks ago. It was more convenient. So this whole thing doesn't jive. It doesn't rhyme. So why is that? So we're going to start with Shabbat. We'll give Shabbat. We're going to use several holidays as an example, but we're going to start with Shabbat. So there's a very strange passage in the Talmud when it comes to Shabbat, page 103, text 1. It comes from the Talmudic tractate of Shabbat. The Roman emperor asked Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania was one of the Tanaic sages that lived in Israel. And as you know, Rome then was in charge of Israel. And there was a close relationship between the Roman hierarchy and the Jewish hierarchy. So he said, why do the dishes of Shabbat produce such an enticing aroma? Like every time he would walk in Jerusalem or walk in other Jewish neighborhoods, and he would smell the food that people would prepare for Shabbat, and each Shabbat, it had this magical pull. So Rabbi Yeshua answered, we have a special spice. If you give it a look in Hebrew, it says, Amalo tavlin echad yesh lanu v'shabbat shmo. There's one spice that we have, and that spice is called Shabbat. We place it in the Shabbat dishes, and it gives off a fragrant aroma. And by the way, I remember when I was in Jerusalem, I once visited the very, very ultra-Orthodox neighborhood called Mea Sha'arim, and they were selling chamin, that's called cholent, in the middle of the week. And nobody was buying it, maybe 2, 3 buyers. I asked the guy, he says, we tried it as an experiment. It just doesn't have the same flavor and the same fragrance and the same as when you eat it on Shabbat. So when you're grilling hot dogs on the 4th of July, would it taste any different than the hot dogs you grill on the 3rd of July or the 5th of July? Absolutely not. But when you come to food, the food of Shabbat has a unique taste to it. There is something very, very special. Now, that's if food was specially prepared for Shabbat. If all you're going to have is tuna fish on Shabbat, I don't think it's going to be that different. But the foods that you make for Shabbat, the same food that you make for Shabbat, if you make it during the week, it does not have the same taste. There's another story, which is a Hasidic story. There was a great rabbi in the time of the Tzemach Tzedek, it was in the early 1800s, who lived in the Ukraine. And his name was Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin. He was a very holy man. In fact, when his mother was pregnant with him, she went to visit the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, and he stood up and he said the Holy Ark came in because he said there's going to be a very special soul assigned to this baby. So he was a student in school, and the teacher was teaching him a halacha. What was the halacha that he was teaching him? The halacha is the following. We should never know of it. But if somebody is traveling through the desert, and usually they would travel with a convoy. But what happens if the person gets detached from the convoy, which can happen? Somebody has to use the outhouse, and then the captain of the convoy forgets that there was somebody there, and all of a sudden he's alone, disoriented, trying to go into the direction. So he knows he has to go east or west, so he looks at the sun, but he loses track of the days. What does he do about Shabbat? So the halacha is that he has to try to remember when Shabbat was the last time, and then he has to start counting 6 days, and the 7th day of his count, he keeps Shabbat. And then when he gets to his destination, he has to find out what the real Shabbat is. So even though he has to bring an offering for violating the Shabbat, because he did violate the Shabbat, but nevertheless, in order not to forget the concept of Shabbat, he's celebrating it, but it may not be the real Shabbat. That's the halacha. So the young boy who later became the Ruzhiner Rebbe said to the teacher, I don't understand the case. Please explain to the case. He kept on explaining. He says, I just don't get it. He says, what don't you get? He says, how can you be confused when Shabbat is? He said, what do you mean? He says, when you put your head out of the window and you look and you sniff the air and you look at the sky, you know that it's Shabbat. He knew it's Shabbat because of his spiritual intuition that he was so connected to it. Now, we may not be connected to it, but what it tells you is that there is a certain energy that's there, which is special on Shabbat. We're going to go back and talk about this, but to explain what is unique about Shabbat and why Shabbat is a holy day. And what does it mean that God created the world in 6 days and he rested on the seventh? We touched upon it last week when we said he created tranquility, but today we're going to put it into terms which is going to be a little bit more Kabbalistic. Okay, the next holiday we're going to talk about is Yom Kippur. So it's interesting that going back to the story of that emperor who asked Rabbi Yeshua why the food tastes better, he said, can you give me some of that spice? He said, no, you have to be a Shabbat observer to have it. Okay. So what's the story about Yom Kippur? So there's actually a story. There was a Jewish singer. His name was Yontif Erlich. He wasn't a wealthy man. He was a poor man, but his livelihood was by singing at weddings, and he recorded his songs. Avram Fried, who's one of the most popular singers today in the Orthodox world, got permission from the family to take the lyrics, and he sang it. Each song is more um, each song, I'm opening this up because I have the song on play. I'll see it. Each song is more touching than the other. I'll just play the tune. Now, the story is like this. The story is that this was in the time of the Soviet Union, and many Jews had given up Judaism, and they went with the program with the Soviet Union. And many of them were forced to go to the army, and many of them were great, smart people, and they became officers in the army. One of them in particular was a captain of a warship. And one day, as he was traveling near port, he sees the city of Odessa, which is in the Ukraine. City of Odessa is a beautiful port city, and he's attracted to it. So he brings the ship close to the port. And all of a sudden, he begins to hear, and probably in his imagination, a tune. And he can't actually make peace with the tune. It's familiar, but he doesn't know where he got it. And he says, I have to follow this tune. And he starts to follow the tune. He jumps off the boat and he starts to rush through the city. And as he's going deeper and deeper, the tune becomes louder and louder until he comes to a side of the city that's not as fancy and bright as the rest of the city. And as he's coming there, he's walking through narrow alleyways, and the tune is so strong, and he sees an old babushka lady, and he says, Mother, mother, mutter you, tell me, please, what is the song I hear? And she looks at him and she says, you must be a Jew. And the song you're hearing is the song of Kol Nidre, because tonight is Yom Kippur. And he says, tonight is Yom Kippur. And he begins to cry and he says, where do I go? And she shows him the entrance to the synagogue down the road. And he walks in and he sees a group of people there. Amongst them are other Soviet officers that he recognizes. And as he's running in, the lady says, God sent you because we don't have a cantor to lead the services. He give him a tallis, he wraps himself, and he goes to the lectern to the Chazan's place, and he begins to sing the Kol Nidre. And he pours his heart out, and he says the pain, the longing to be coming home and to throw off all the Soviet nonsense and to reconnect with my Judaism is so strong that this is what Yom Kippur did. So I'm going to play just a drop of the tune so you'll hear it. And for those of you that are listening, you'll also be able to hear it. Anyone understand Yiddish? Anyways, it's a very touching song, so I'm not going to play it, the whole thing, but nevertheless, it's very, very powerful because he says he's in a armed ship and there's sailors there and all of that. But nevertheless, it was a homecoming. So what is the meaning of the story? Let's give a look at some of the lyrics as they've been translated into English. Um, Text 2 on page 104. This is after he gets off the boat. He weaves through the streets, hot on the trail, the melody stronger and stronger. What is that message? What is his tale? His heart can't hold out much longer. He spots a babushka walking along, crossing the street in the middle. She can decipher, can she decipher the mysterious song? Can she solve this great riddle? Grandma, he says, please listen to me. The song of my ear is quite bruising. The melody is haunting. It won't let me be. I fear that my mind I am losing. Your face tells me, comes the reply, that you're a Jew, my dear skipper. You're churning, you're burning, I'll tell you why. Tonight is the night of Yom Kippur. And then the thing is, tonight is the night of Yom Kippur. I must go. Where can I connect? And she shows him where the synagogue is. And then she says, God always helps because we don't have a chazan. They were all sent off to the gulag. You're the one that's going to lead the prayers. And then it continues on how he leads the prayers. So the point of the matter is that if you take any of the secular holidays that we have, you can't ascribe that kind of story to it that on the 4th of July, I feel free, or on Columbus Day, I feel discovery. You might be able to psych yourself up, but it doesn't have that tremendous power. And I want to say that there's something more, which is even more striking, and that awakens the heart. There was a rabbi, Chabad rabbi, we used to call him Schwartzy. His name was Rabbi Shlomo Schwartz. He was born in New Jersey, and he wasn't always Chabad, but he became Chabad. He was a Gingy, and he had
Dingy?
Gingy means a red beard, red hair, and everything. Very sweet guy. Knew him well. Unfortunately, his wife died when she was young. But anyways, he was working for Chabad of California, Los Angeles, at UCLA. And he used to go out to the college campuses, and he used to tell me before I went out, he says to me, Yossi, your father would not allow you to go where I go, even if you wore the thickest sunglasses, because he saw all kinds of craziness there. But anyways, he was very close to a lot of the people, and he actually had a conversation with one of the people that worked at the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute. And this guy had an informal way of tracking a curious pattern to see when most people come in when they had a breakdown. So this is what he writes in his book. He wrote his own book. Page 105, text 3. The doctor told me, that's the doctor at the Neurological Psychiatric Institute, that an average of 5 people per day experience breakdowns and are brought to the MPI. Few of them are Jewish. But he said, I've noticed that every single year around the Jewish holidays, the Jewish admittance goes up dramatically. And on one day each year, admittance spikes closer to 20 people, with 15 of them Jewish. Which day is that, I asked. The doctor said it's Yom Kippur. And here's the punchline. Each year, when admittance to NPI went up on Yom Kippur, it was on the Hebrew calendar date, the 10th of Tishrei, not consistent with the date on the secular calendar. The Jews who were brought in on Yom Kippur didn't even know it was Yom Kippur. So what are we talking about over here? There's a subconsciousness that comes and is activated by the soul. And the soul is in tune with the calendar day, with the energy of the particular day. And the soul senses this day is an important day. And it's very interesting. You'll notice that we don't even have to go that far. If you give a look at American Jewry, even those that don't go to synagogue all year, but there's certain times of the year that they say they have to be in synagogue, and that is on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And why do they have to be in synagogue? They're not religious anyways. They're not looking for atonement, because if they're looking for atonement, they would start changing their life. There's something that tugs at them, and you ask them, why are you here? How can I not be here? There's something there that pulls them. So what does this mean? That there is something there in the day, and we're going to explain all of this in a few moments. So what's the conclusion of this? We'll use the Exodus as an example. One of the most famous Jewish holidays of the year is Passover. Pesach. And on the 14th of Nisan, we would bring the Paschal Lamb. At night, we have a Seder. And what do we do by the Seder? We eat certain foods. We have the reciting of the Haggadah. And the main food that we have to eat that night is matzah. And we also eat the afikomen. And in the days of the temple, we used to eat the two offerings. There was the Korban Chagiga, which was the holiday offering, and Korban Pesach, which was eaten at the end. Okay? Now, conventional wisdom is why do we do it? Because God released the Jewish people on the 15th of Pesach. The truth to be known is just the opposite. The 15th of Nisan, from the time of creation, was already an inherently holy day, that the nature and the character of that day was liberation. So therefore, God said, if I'm going to redeem my children, I will do it on the day that is most conducive for revelation, for redemption. The same thing is true with the negative day, like Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, there wasn't just one thing that was bad that happened. There were a lot of things that were bad that happened. In fact, we recounted, even in later years, the expulsion from Spain happened on Tisha B'Av, which means to say that that was a day that God created negative energy, and he allowed that day to be infused with the negative energy until Mashiach comes, when it will be transformed. So we have to look at it as a different kind of thing. We look at it as a day that's embedded with some sort of spiritual energy. It's very interesting that when you look in the Medrash, and when you ask someone, when was the first Seder ever held? In other words, when was the first time Jews either ate matzah or ate the Paschal Lamb?
First.
So most people will say it's the first night of Pesach, when the Jews were still in Egypt. But if you look in the Midrash says something more. The Midrash says that Abraham, when he served the angels, he served them matzah, and he served them a certain kind of meat. And Rashi brings down from the Medrash, because that night was Pesach. I'll explain that in a minute. Not only that, we read just a few weeks ago that when Esau, last week, when Esau wanted the blessing from his father, and Rivka instructed Yaakov to go do it, so she brought meat from 2 goats, right? The question is asked in the Medrash, why 2 goats? Can he finish 2 goats? He couldn't even finish 1 goat. And the Medrash says, so some say because he liked tongue, but even if he liked tongue, 1 tongue is enough. Tongue is big. The Medrash says it was to bring the 2 offerings that we bring on the night of Pesach, the Chagiga and the Korban Pesach, and it was the night of Pesach. Furthermore, there's another Medrash that's even stranger, and it says that Cain and Abel, when they brought their offerings, it was on the initiation of Adam, their father, and it was also the 15th of Nisan, and he said to them, tonight you need to bring a korban, you need to bring an offering. So Abel understood it. For that reason, he brought a lamb. But Abel understood it, so that's why he brought a lamb. Cain did not. So you might say that these madrashim are just, why would the Medrash spend time even telling us that? Because there's a point over here. And the point over here is that the concept of Pesach did not start with the liberation. The concept of Pesach was already infused within the day innately from the time of creation. Now, I'm going to give you an example about matzah. This is from a talk from the Rebbe. Why is matzah so special? What's the matzah that makes it special? What's the difference between matzah and chametz? There's a joke that they used to say in Israel during the corona, that there was the first patient that was brought in, they didn't know how to deal with him. So the doctors had to speak to him with an intercom, and he was in a hospital room. And the patient said to the doctor, okay, can I eat regular food? They said, no, you're only going to get matzah. You're going to get matzah for breakfast. You're going to get matzah for lunch. And you're going to get matzah for there. He says, why? My stomach can't tolerate it. He said, no, that's the only food that fits under the door. So that's what they said. The whole idea. That was the joke that was going. Another joke that they had in Israel was that a Jew from Moroccan descent was invited by an Ashkenazi Jew for lunch. And after eating the bland Ashkenazic food, he went to get a COVID test because he thought he lost his taste buds, right? So these are all the jokes that go about. But the truth of the matter is that matzah is a holy food because matzah, first of all, we eat it because it's a command from God. But there is the characteristic that matzah is all about self-nullification. The whole idea of bread is pompous, is full of air, it rises, and matzah is the idea of bittul. The idea of bittul, which is self-nullification, is what draws down the divine into the world. It's very interesting. We celebrated Rosh Chodesh Kislev last week, and that's the anniversary of the Rebbe's healing from the heart attack. One of the things that happened then, because the Rebbe couldn't come out to the synagogue, so the Rebbe spoke to the physicians, and he said to give over, he actually told it to my father as well, to give over a message. And he says, when you take a syringe and you want to fill the syringe, you have to fill it, whether it's a blood test or whether you want to fill it with the medicine. How do you draw in the liquid? Is only through creating a vacuum. The vacuum is what brings the desired result of whatever you want to fill it with. He said the same thing is true with us. When we want the infinite presence of God within us, it's through creating a vacuum within ourselves and self-nullification. And with that, the Rebbe explains why there was a command to eat matzah even before the Exodus. Because if you give a look at the story of Passover, the way it's described in the Torah, before Israel was even redeemed, God gave them the mitzvah that in the night of Passover, before the 10th plague even hit, that they were supposed to eat matzah with the Korban Pesach. And if the whole reason we're eating matzah is because there wasn't enough time for the dough to rise and they had to leave in an expedited way, why would they eat matzah before? Why couldn't they enjoy a good challah? Why did they have to eat matzah? And the answer is because they had to experience that self-negation, that self-nullification, in order to draw upon them the divine presence of God. And it was symbolized through the matzah. So when we look at the fact that the Medrash says that Abraham ate matzah or Cain and Abel did their thing, let's give a look the way it's expressed in text number 4 on 106. Abraham wasn't celebrating an event in the future. He was tapping into a spiritual energy of freedom that was and always is present at the time of the year. The energy of liberation is encoded into the composition of the annual cycle. So instead of looking at Pesach as a time that's when the Exodus happened and that's why we have the celebration, the opposite is true. The 15th of Nisan is inherently holy, and that is why God chose that there should be the Exodus. The same thing is true with Yom Kippur. It wasn't that after the last 40 days that Moses was on the mountain, he finally got the atonement of God. When God created the world, he already created the 10th day of Tishrei as Yom HaKippurim, as the time of atonement. So therefore, by divine providence coincided that Moshe got the atonement on the 40th day when God said, I forgive you the way you asked. So therefore, from the beginning, so when you look at it that way, you see that the celebration is not just a celebration of the past. It's not the history of the past. It's the history of now. And therefore, I want to explain something. There is a law in the Talmud that says that if you had a miracle that happened to you somewhere, let's say you were driving down the road and a boulder fell off a cliff and it hit your car and the whole car was smashed into a pancake and you were able to get out alive. That's a miracle, right? So whenever you pass by that place, you have to recite a blessing. And the blessing basically ends with Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam she'asa li nes b'makom hazeh. Blessed are you, God, the Lord of the universe, that you made a miracle for me in this particular place. Speak about time. We're going to be celebrating Hanukkah soon. We have a whole section on Hanukkah in a minute. You're going to be celebrating Hanukkah. What is the blessing of Hanukkah? The first blessing is the mitzvah of lighting the candles. What is the second one? That the one that they miracles to our ancestors Bazman Hazen, this particular time. So this particular time is again a miraculous time. But it's not a repeat. It's actually on a higher level than it ever was before. So when we experience the holiday, we're not just experiencing the holiday of the past, we're experiencing that energy now. So therefore, the calendar, we have to be very aware of the day because that's the mission of the day. And we're soon going to see a little video where the Rebbe speaks about the fact that every day has its mission. It's called the order of the day. Just like an army, when you're in the army, there's a commander says, this is the order of the day. God is our commander in chief. Now, I want to go to Shabbat because Shabbat actually explains it even a little bit more. Why is Shabbat so special? Now, of course, when you talk to a child, the child imagines God sitting in a shed and manufacturing this world, and he's sweating away and working so hard. And finally, he looks at the world and he says, this is a fantastic world. Let me take a break. I can rest, take a nap, sit down and have a sip of tea. Obviously, we can't ascribe that kind of characteristic to Hashem. So we spoke about last week that there's the idea of menucha, the idea of tranquility that came. So let's explain this a little bit. One of the things that we find in Kabbalah, and it's also expressed in some of the writings of even the liturgy of Shabbat, is that on Shabbat, everything elevates to a higher level. There's a fantastic reading in the Siddur, Kad Ayel Shabbata, it's in Aramaic. As soon as Shabbat enters, it ascends and there's no evil there. Everything gets removed, it becomes holy. So what's the meaning of that? So I want to give you an example that Kabbalah uses to try to illustrate it. So we know that when God created the world, he used the power of speech. What's the power of speech? The power of speech is God said, and when he said the word extended outside of him with the various breath that goes along with it. And that word and that breath, so to speak, is what created and sustained the entire being, right? So everything that exists in the world today, as it says, La'olam Hashem Dvarcha Nitzav B'Shamayim, forever, your word stands firmly in the heaven, means that the only way the heaven exists is because God said, let there be the firmament. In Hebrew, it says, Yehi Rakia. So that firmament, those words are constantly creating it. What is the nature of speech? The nature of speech is recognizing something that's outside of yourself. That's why you need to speak. It's something that you can share with someone else. Does speech have the intimacy of thought? No, because thought is private. Thought is in your own realm. Thought is something that nobody else can see except you. So the Kabbalistic scholars explain that the power of speech was used on the 6 days of creation, but the seventh day was not created with speech, it was created with God's thought. It's the intimate world of God, and therefore the whole world elevates to a higher level, and you feel a more infinite light of the divine that's in the world. In fact, the whole idea of Shabbat is to be able to recognize the Creator in the creation, because the creation itself, even though it has divine light, but it's a very limited light. It's a very filtered light, and it could be hidden within nature. On Shabbat, we transcend nature. On Shabbat, we enter into the realm of God. So when we say about Shabbat, and here's a very interesting, are you following me so far? So let me give you one other example, because this is what the Zohar says. So one of the prohibited items of work that we're not allowed to do on Shabbat is the act of selection. That's called borer, to take something bad and put it aside and then take the good for yourself. What does it mean in spiritual terms? In spiritual terms, it means that anytime we engage in anything that's mundane, we have to elevate it, right? We have to elevate the spark of God that's there, and we have to cause the outside to be discarded. That's what we do every day. So when you sit down for a meal during a weekday and you recite a blessing over it, a recite over a blessing, so what you're doing is you're elevating the divine spark that's in the food. We talked about this many times. It's based on a verse in the Torah that says, "Kilo al alechem levado yichya adam ala kol motzi pi Hashem," that one does not live on bread alone, but on everything that is extracted from God's mouth, which means that every food, every kernel of grain has a divine spark. And that's called in the vernacular of Kabbalah, avodat habirurim. Avodat habirurim means the service of elevating and refining the sparks. And that is the whole reason why the soul descended into this world, which we studied last week, is the avodat habirurim. Comes along the Torah and says that only happens during the weekday. On Shabbat, it's not like that. On Shabbat, there's no avodat habirurim. On Shabbat, everything is elevated to a level of holiness. That's why we also find that even those people that didn't eat meat, not because they were vegetarians, but because they felt that they weren't worthy of elevating the sparks, they didn't eat meat during the week, but on Shabbat they ate meat, because on Shabbat the meat was elevated to a level of holiness, right? Therefore, on Shabbat you can indulge, not because you're rewarded for the hard work, but because the food has been elevated and refined automatically. As Shabbat comes in, everything is catapulted to the highest level of the divine, and it takes on another persona. So physical food that during the week you have to, what's called lochem, that you have to fight to, one of the reasons why bread is called lechem, it comes from the word lochem, to fight, you have to fight to extract the good spark and discard the negative. On Shabbat, you don't have the lochem, there's no war. It happens naturally because of the elevation of Shabbat, which means to say that now we look at Shabbat in a totally different way. It's not that because God worked hard for 6 days and on the seventh day he rested and therefore we have to rest, but when God created the world, he created the world in such a way that 6 days have a particularly unique characteristic, and the seventh day is the day of elevation. Okay. There's actually a reading on page 106, but basically what he's saying over there, that no difference who the person is, a Jewish person, whether a ignoramus, a peasant, or a holy one, they all have the same level of holiness on Shabbat. Let's give a look at the holidays and then look at this as well. So the 3 pilgrimage holidays are what? Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. So there's a parable that they had once, that there was a king that was once traveling through dry land and with his son, and his son became very thirsty. So he figured that a lot of people traveling this road can be thirsty. So he was telling his people where would be the best place to dig for a well, because he knew exactly where the water was. And he said, if you go to this spot and you dig down, the water will squirt up and you'll have a source of water. The same thing is true with the calendar of the year. These holidays are like wells in the dry land that if you tap into it, you're able to bring out that divine energy. Whether Pesach is the idea of freedom, as we're going to see, give a look, text 6, written by a scholar of our days, Rabbi Yankee Tauber, page 108. Each festival marks a point in our journey through time at which our Heavenly Father supplied us with resources that nurture our spiritual lives. On Passover, we were granted the gift of freedom. On Shavuot, God gave us his Torah, our charter as his kingdom of priests and holy people. Rosh Hashanah is a day in which God first became king. That's why we declare God's sovereignty, and we actually inaugurate God as the king every year on Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur, God granted us the gift of tshuva, the capacity to rectify and transform anything in our deficient past. Hanukkah marks the salvation of the Jewish soul, the triumph of light and purity over darkness and adulteration, the miracle of Purim, the salvation of the Jewish body, and so on with all festivals and special days on the calendar. We're still going to see a chart that charts out every day of the year, every week of the year, every meaning. But before that, I would like to go on Hanukkah, since we're almost Hanukkah. If you give a look at page 108, so you see a table of central Hanukkah themes. You can choose one and see how it actually enhances your Jewish practice. So we're going to read it together. One thing is Hanukkah energy and application to life. Always go up. Each night of Hanukkah, we add a new candle, building light and never remaining the same. So let me explain this halacha. Originally, the halacha was, in the Talmud, it says that every night of Hanukkah, we light one candle. Why? Because every night represents another miraculous night. Remember, the Chanukiah, not the Chanukiah, the menorah that they used in the temple had 7 candles. So this 8 candles that we have, plus the shamash, does not represent the menorah that was in the temple, but it represents the miracle of lights that we celebrate on Hanukkah. Since there were 8 nights that the candles lit, so we want to show that the miracle was there. So shouldn't it be sufficient with one? Why do we add one every night? So there are several reasons, but the main reason, and actually it's an argument between Shammai and Hillel, we go according to Hillel, but the argument is ma'alin ba'kodesh, we ascend when it comes to holiness, which means growing in holiness, and therefore the application to life is Jewish life too must grow. Stagnation is not an option. If someone says, I've reached my level, this is where I'm satisfied, that's not growth. A living thing has to grow. So we always have to find ways how we can add more light. Self-sacrifice. The Maccabees fought against all impossible odds, risking everything for what they believed in. And if you know the story of Hanukkah, you will know that there were many Jews, not all the Jews. In fact, they say that there was a majority of the Jews who Hellenized, and they thought that you go along with the Syrian Greeks and don't stir up trouble. And the Maccabees, led by Matisyahu and Yehuda HaMaccabee, was seen a little bit as zealots. But eventually everybody accepted them because everybody wants to go with a winner. But they believed in a principle and they fought for it. The same thing is true when it comes to us, that we have to stand for the truth. Do the best. So here's another interesting thing. The Maccabees could have settled for impure oil. Why? There is a halacha in the Talmud that says that tuma duchuya batzibur. You know what that means? Tuma means ritual uncleanness. Duchuya is postponed or pushed away. Batzibur, if the entire congregation is unclean, and the only oil that you can find is defiled oil, you can light the menorah with defiled oil. What did the Maccabees do? The Maccabees couldn't find any clean oil. But they said, if we gave our best to liberate Israel from the idolaters and to restore the purity of the land, how can we consciously use defiled oil and light the menorah with it? So they didn't give up until they found that one flask of oil that was still sealed with the seal of the holy of the high priest in the temple. So the same thing is true for us, that we learn a lesson for that it's not about compromising, but it's about doing the best we can. This is also about the Rebbe would speak about this small little jug of oil, that every one of us has a little jug of oil within us that's undefiled, that's not defiled, that remains pure. Some people call it the Nekudat HaYadut, the Pinta Yiddish, they say in Yiddish, the spark of Judaism, just like that Navy captain from the Russian ship, that it awoke, something on Yom Kippur awoke him. It can never be contaminated. Another thing about Hanukkah is that we light it at night. You can't light it during the day. You have to wait till sunset, because the whole purpose of it is to light up the darkness. And finally, Hanukkah is the only holiday that we actually have to celebrate it with the outside. And in the olden days, the menorah, or what they call today the Chanukiah, was placed at the entrance to the house, closest to the street, that everybody should see it. And it had to be in the doorway. Today, we can do it by doing it the way we do the outside celebrations, but when it became impossible for Jews to always celebrate in the street, they did it indoors, but that's what it's meant for. So here you have a little talk of Hanukkah. Before we go through the chart, we're going to play a video, and the video is going to show us how the energy of the day is there. And this was something that was so unique to the Rebbe. Sometimes the Rebbe would start and he would speak about the importance of the day, and then he would go into the depth. And nobody understood why, but you look at the consistency and the train of thought of the Rebbe over all the years, he tapped into the energy. And we're going to see that now.
Learning to tell time is an early milestone, but the Rebbe revealed that beyond telling the time, we need to find out what time itself has to tell us. Let me explain. Creation is a constant act. At every moment, God energizes every feature of existence into being. Time, too, is a creation. Each of its segments is created with a unique divine energy and purpose. But how can we identify the special energy of any given moment? The Rebbe often explained it like this at children's rallies. God is our commander-in-chief. We're his soldiers, and our mission is to push back darkness with holiness and kindness. And besides the overall mission, there's also the order of the day, a specific instruction meant for today.
Und sicher da an Ablehnung, was geht der Kommandier-in-Chief zu jeder von seinen Soldiers, wie mir selbst sicher, wie sie eingeführt in der Armee da, als sie da in Zugabe zu dem Order und zu der Anhoges und Anweisungen, wo der Armee bekommt, von Zeit zu Zeit, ist da der Order of the Day.
That idea opens up a bigger point. Time isn't just neutral background. Each segment carries its own message and purpose. And when you start paying attention, you notice that there are several layers that shape what a given moment is about. Day, week, month, and special dates, all working together to define what this moment is asking from us. Day. The Torah describes each of the 6 days of creation, followed by Shabbat. Those 7 themes are repeated each week. Take Wednesday, for example.
Gefinden mir sich Easter bei jedem Horvi in den 4. Tag von Woche, was so damals sagt man, der Eibischter hat beschaffen, es Hamoir HaGodel, die Sohn, was Hamoir HaKoton, die Levone.
Wednesday's energy is associated with creating and sharing light. Week. Each Shabbat, a different Torah portion is read, and every portion has 7 sections, corresponding to the 7 days of the week.
Aber soll leben mit der Zeit und Masbir gewähren hat das Menschen mit der Chelik von Parshas HaShavua, was sie in der Parsha Gufe verbunden mit dem Tag.
Month. 12 months, 12 themes. To find the theme, check the month's name and its significant dates. For example, Nisan means miraculous, and it contains the holiday of Passover.
Ist der die Zeit im Jahr, wenn mit der Mond jeder nach der, und dämmelt in der maseldicke Zeit, was mir gibt im speziellen Kirches auf Durchführen das Befehl, ist das verbunden mit Zmanchel Seinu.
Moreover, each month is split into a number of days, and numbers are deeply meaningful. For example, the number 18 spells Chai, life.
Es kommt ein Tag, was ist der Chai. In Chedesh, der Mond ist noch einmal auf der Linie von Lebendigkeit.
Special dates. The Jewish calendar has special dates, biblical, historical, or evolved by custom. Each reveals something profound about the time in which the event is set.
Als ich gewähne, a jemil werde es a schonische Liefnisse. Und a jemil werde es muss noch sein Liefnisse. Und mehrere Jahren Liefnisse. Apal Pikena, se kommt derselbe Tag, im selben Chedesh. Nur miteinander Jahr, ist a demut einander Linien, einander erwiderte.
When you start paying attention to these patterns, time stops feeling random. You begin to notice that each day comes with its own built-in message and opportunity. It's not just about watching the clock. It's about asking, what does this moment want from me? Sometimes it's to help someone. Sometimes it's to learn something. Sometimes it's to slow down. Each day comes with its own assignment. It's a different kind of telling time, listening for what the day is asking.
So I want to give you an example. We're not going to do all of it because it's quite long, but you're going to take the book home so you'll see it. But if you look at page 110, this is the Jewish map of time. Now, we talk about the 7 days of the week. So before I go to the 7 days of the week, we know that there are 10 sfirot, right? In the order of the structure, the way God reveals the divine light, there's 10 faculties. The first three are the Chabad, the intellectual ones, but those stand above and they feed the 7 emotional. The 7 emotional is, what's the idea of emotion? The idea of emotion is relationships. God's relationship with the world comes through these 7 gates, these 7 emotional faculties. Therefore, you have the 7 days of the week. Each day represents a unique emotion. So give a look. Sunday is the emotion of chesed. Chesed means unlimited kindness. So what does the service of the day mean? It's a day to show love to God, to our fellow human being. It's also excelling in kindness. I remember in 1986, the Rebbe started a new custom that he would stand by the door before his room and thousands would pass by and he would give them $1 and make them an emissary for tzedakah, for charity. It was called giving the dollars. And he did it on Sunday. And every time he did it on Sunday, every Sunday he did it, he would engage people. And it wasn't until years later that he explained why he did it on Sunday. He said, Sunday is chesed. It's the idea of giving. Monday is gevura. Gevura means straight. That's why Monday is the only day of the week that God did not say, and it's good. Because Monday is the idea of strength, it's reverence, it's withholding. Tuesday is called Tiferet, beauty. Tuesday is the fusion of Chesed and Gevura. That's why we find that on Tuesday, God said twice, and it shall be good. So it's a harmony of heaven and earth, because one good is for heaven, one good is for earth. And it's actually the center column because it is able to fuse the right and the left, the right being kindness, chesed, and the left being gevura. Wednesday is the idea of victory, the determination to overcome one's undesirable character traits, and also to be able to endure any kind of challenges. Thursday is the idea of splendor, hod, and that's recognizing God's splendor of his creation, which leads us to humility. And then you come Friday, which is Yesod. It's the foundational connection between the world and God. And Malchut is royalty, which is Shabbat, withdrawal from the creative activity to focus on God and accept his sovereignty. So all the 7 emotional sfirot that we learn in the Kabbalah are expressed in each day. And that's why you find in the Talmud that the Talmud says that if you're going to do a wedding, do it on this day. If you're going to do this activity, do it on that day. And it also says don't start something new on Monday because Monday is the day of strength, and so on and so forth. So this is an example how every day has its unique character. We also have the days of the month. I'm not going to go through all of them, but Rosh Chodesh is the new moon, and the 15th day is the full moon. So that, yeah,
But since you said there are 7 emotional factors, what are the other 3?
the intellectual ones: wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Those are the first 3. Chachma, Binah, and Dat. That's the acronym for Chabad. That's why we're called Chabad, because we work with the 3 intellectual, Chachma, Binah, Dat. The same thing is why the Medrash says Yisrael monim lilavana biglal shedomim lilavana, which means that Jews are similar to the moon, therefore we count according to the moon, even though we need to balance it with the solar year, but we're governed by the lunar year. That's why in Judaism, life is cyclical until Mashiach comes. You have the ups and downs, the peaks and valleys. Sometimes we're on the top of the world, and sometimes things are not so good. So when things are in the top, it's in harmony with the sun. That's why we learned in the very first class of this course, when we spoke about Kohelet, about Shlomo HaMelech, that the Medrash says, the Talmud says that the time of King Solomon was like the 15th day when there's the full moon, because we lived in harmony and peace, and all the nations came to Israel. So that's the idea of the full moon. If you give a look further on the next page, you will see the chart of the months. Each month has its own meaning, right? Nisan is the month of redemption. It's miraculous. Iyar is a month of health, and so on and so forth. So you take this home with you, you will see that it has an amazing, every month has its specific character. I want to take you to the month of Kislev, which is the fourth month before the end of the cycle from Nisan, because we are now in Kislev. Kislev is the month of Hanukkah, the festival of light, centers around the theme of Torah's light. This is underscored by the 19th of Kislev, which we celebrate the revelation of the deeper secrets of Torah, the teachings of Hasidut, which that comes a few days before Hanukkah. Speaking about the 19th of Kislev, it falls out this year on December 9th, and that'll be our final class of this lesson, and we're going to open it up to the entire community and have a little bit of a festive event in the social hall for that final class, and it'll tap into the energy of that day. If you go further, you will also see that there's 54 portions in the Torah, and each portion has its own unique meaning. And as I said before earlier tonight, that in the olden days, instead of writing the day of the month, many times they would write that today, well, for instance, was the third day of the portion, Vayetze. If you give a look on the word Vayetze, since we are there right now, so it's Jacob's dream. What was about Jacob's dream that was so special? Jacob's dream is about a ladder, and he saw angels ascending and descending. What is that all about? So one of the deeper interpretations is that it represents tefillah and Torah. Tefillah is us ascending above, and every time we recite words of prayer, it creates angels, and those are the angels that are sent to heaven. And every time we study words of Torah, it creates angels, and those are the angels that descend from on high to us. And that's what he saw and experienced in the ladder, with the angels on the ladder. But it was also the time that he was able to establish his family in Haran, which he eventually came back to Israel. So you see that every portion has its unique meaning. So therefore, if it's in that day of the portion, the message of the lesson of the portion encompasses the entire day. So you will see here that it goes through all 54 portions of the Torah. Finally, I want to finish with personal dates. We talk about the holidays, but we all have our own unique holiday. And what's our own unique holiday? The birthday. Why a birthday? Because as we read a few weeks ago, in the name of Rabbi Cook, that he said, when a person is born, it's God's statement that the world couldn't exist without you from this day on. And you came, and it's a special mission. Now, it's very interesting that the Rebbe made a very, very big deal about birthdays. And he had a whole bunch of practices. I'm actually going to give out to everybody a sheet based on the Rebbe's recommendations, what we do on a birthday, why a birthday is so special. So give a look what he says on page 121, text 7. The joy and the offering of praise and thanks to God on the birthday of every individual Jew is not only in connection to the original event of their birth, which is commemorated this day, but also in connection to the birth that takes place on this very day itself. When their vitality is once again drawn down, a new flow of life force for the entire year ahead. It says the following, that the reason that on a birthday, if you give a look what the Rebbe writes about a birthday, I don't have it up here, but I'm going to read it to you, because I was looking at it today. So the Rebbe writes in our Yom Yom, on one's birthday, one should spend some time in seclusion, bringing to mind recollections from the past and pondering over them, and those of his bygone actions that call for rectification or repentance, what should rectify them. So there's an energy there. In fact, it says that the mazel, we have ever heard the word mazel tov? Mazel means the flow. The flow from your inner soul is most evident and strongest on the birthday. And when you celebrate the birthday, it's not a time when you go out and party and merrymaking and all of that, but you actually connect with that spiritual divine energy. You give blessings, you receive blessings, you do works of charity, you study more, you're more involved in divine things. I remember when I was in yeshiva in Israel, Kfar Chabad, we had a very strict rabbi that was in charge of the Talmud study. And you have to report to class exactly at 11 o'clock. Now, the first class in the morning started at 7, and that went to 8:30. Then you had prayer, and then you had breakfast. Well, I'm sorry, 10:30 in the morning. You had to be in the study hall at 10:30. So at 10:30 sharp, he would place himself by the entrance of the door, and he had a ledger of every student, and he would look around, see who's there. And if someone would come late, he would say, "Why did you come late today?" And he knew because he spied on everybody. So we were always on time. On my birthday, I wanted to daven long. I even skipped breakfast. So I was in seclusion praying for, and it was already 10 to 11. And then I realized I have to go. So I come. So he says, as I walk in, he says to me in Yiddish, "Dus gehabt a malach? You caught an angel today?" So I said to him, "It's my birthday today." Birthday? Okay, go right in. Because everybody knew that on a birthday, you have to be able to be more in seclusion. So it's something which is a very, very important time. If you give a look, I'm going to give you all the practices that you're going to take home. But if you look at page 122, we get called up to the Torah on the Shabbat before. We give extra tzedakah. When we pray with extra concentration. We read from the book of Psalms. There's a psalm that corresponds to your age. So if you turn 30, you're supposed to say Psalm 31, right? So you're supposed to study it. In fact, when I went in for my bar mitzvah, together with my twin brother, the Rebbe tested us, but then when he told us about the customs of the birthday, he says, you will certainly study your psalm on your birthday with at least 2 commentaries, Rashi and Mitzudat David. Mitzudat David, he wrote himself 2 commentaries. He wrote Mitzudat David, which is an explanation, and then he has something which is called Mitzudat Sion, which he takes unusual Hebrew words and gives you the translation of what that Hebrew word means. Like machsi, the word machsi is not usually found, but machsi means a shelter. So he gives you the Hebrew word for a shelter, and so on and so forth. So I had to study it. Also, we learn mystical portions of the Torah. We have to have a positive influence on other people. We have to do more mitzvahs. We have to also do private contemplation. So again, the birthday is a day you were born. So therefore, as you give a look on the screen, it is a perfect match for your soul's energy. Celebrating a birthday also reaffirms the value of life. You see value in your life. And finally, each year, the energy is renewed. And we learned this from Rosh Hashanah. Why is Rosh Hashanah so special? Because every year in Rosh Hashanah, God brings a new divine energy to the world that never existed before. So every year, it goes higher and higher. And this is where I want to go to the spiral staircase. The spiral staircase may feel like you're going endlessly in a circle. But if you looked at it, it's a staircase, you're constantly going up. So even though you pass the same scenery as you're going up the spiral staircase, but you're on a higher level the next time you go up. The same thing is true with the calendar year. Every year you go to a higher level. And the same thing is with birthdays. Every year you reach a higher level. So what we've learned today is that it's not only necessary to lead a purposeful, meaningful life, but we also have to understand the meaning of time and how to infuse our life with the meaning of each and every day. So one of the good things is to look at the calendar, and also Chabad.org has on its calendar historical facts or spiritual facts for every day, what we learn, a lesson that we could learn that we can actually internalize. Anyways, thank you very much. And it's always a pleasure to have you here. And for those that are celebrating Thanksgiving, have a happy holiday. And we will see you next week, same time, same station.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you all. Oh, Charlie, can you do me a favor? Do you want to hand out to everyone, including Selwyn, one of these color notes. And for those that are watching online, Mackenzie will email it tomorrow. When she emails the recording, she will attach that sheet onto the email as well. So you will all get it and no one will be denied. Thank you very much. See you.
Do another thing.